The year was 2247, and Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Terran defense ship Valor, watching the stars stream past in brilliant lines of light. He was tired, bone-deep tired, in a way that 3 cups of synthetic coffee could not fix. The war against the Krell Empire had been going on for 2 years now, and every day brought new challenges that tested the limits of human endurance. Jake was 32 years old, though people often said he looked older. His dark hair had started showing gray at the temples, and his green eyes carried the weight of too many hard decisions. He was tall and lean, with the kind of build that came from spending more time in zero gravity than on solid ground. Other officers respected him, not because he was the loudest voice in the room, but because, when things went wrong, Jake Morrison always found a way forward. The attack on Titan Station had been the worst moment of his career. The Krell had come out of nowhere, their black ships like locusts against the stars. They were parasites, creatures that took over other species and used their bodies like puppets. Humanity had learned about them the hard way, when an entire colony went silent and then turned their weapons on their own people. Jake had only 7 ships under his command that day, old frigates that should have been retired years ago. The Krell brought 40 warships. Every tactical program said it was impossible to win. Every simulation ended with the complete destruction of Titan Station and the death of 50,000 civilians. But Jake did not run the simulations. He looked at what he had and figured out how to use it. He used the asteroid field nearby as cover. He sent 2 ships on suicide runs that looked like retreat, drawing the Krell into a trap. He used mining explosives left over from the colony operations and turned them into improvised mines. He bought time minute by precious minute until reinforcements arrived from Mars. They saved Titan Station. Jake lost 3 of his 7 ships and over 200 crew members. He still remembered every single name. The victory made him famous across human space, but what made him a legend across the entire galaxy was what happened 3 months later at the Kepler Passage. The Kepler Passage was a strategic corridor that 3 different alien species used for trade. When the Krell attacked, they did not care about politics or borders. They just wanted new bodies to infest. The battle was chaos, with human ships fighting alongside the insectoid Thorax, the crystalline Luminari, and the aquatic depths dwellers. Nobody trusted each other, and coordination was a nightmare. Jake found himself in command not because he was the highest-ranking officer, but because he was the only one all 3 species would listen to. He spent 18 hours on an open communication channel, directing ships from 4 different militaries that could barely understand each other. When the Krell commander offered to retreat if the humans abandoned their allies, Jake refused without hesitation. They won, but barely, and the 3 allied species remembered that a human had stood with them when he could have run. That was how humanity earned their chance at the Galactic Council. The Council had existed for over 2,000 years, a gathering of the 12 most powerful and advanced civilizations in known space. Humanity was young, aggressive, and frankly terrifying to most of the older species. They had gone from discovering fire to splitting atoms in just a few thousand years. They fought wars with a ferocity that made even warrior species uncomfortable. But Jake Morrison had proven that humans could also be trusted, could be honorable, could put the lives of aliens above their own survival. So the Council extended an invitation, and Earth sent Jake as their primary representative. The summit was held on Avaloria, a world that existed at the center of Council space. The planet was covered in crystal formations that grew like forests, refracting light in ways that made the whole world shimmer like a dream. Jake had never seen anything like it. Earth was beautiful, but this was beauty on a scale that seemed impossible. The council chambers were carved from a single massive crystal, shaped by technology so advanced it seemed like magic. Representatives from 12 species sat in a circle, each in environments suited to their biology. The Thorax delegation was in a section with higher gravity. The depths dwellers had massive tanks of water. The energy beings called the Chorus existed and contained fields of plasma. And then there were the Valkyrie. Jake had read about them during the 3-week journey to Avaloria. The Valkyrie Empire was one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, with records going back over 50,000 years. They were humanoid in shape, but clearly not human. Their skin had a faint luminescence, glowing softly with colors that shifted based on their emotions. They were taller than humans on average, more slender, with large eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies in their depths. The Valkyrie believed that emotions were sacred, that feelings were the highest form of truth. They had elaborate courtship rituals that could take years. They valued art and philosophy above conquest. To them, humanity must have seemed like barbarians, violent children playing with weapons they barely understood. But when Princess Lyra Vel Asherin entered the chamber, she did not look at Jake with disgust or fear. She looked at him with curiosity. She was stunning in a way that made Jake forget to breathe for a moment. Her skin glowed with soft gold and blue hues, and her hair moved like it was underwater, floating gently despite the normal gravity. She wore robes that seemed to be made of light itself, shifting and changing with every movement. But it was her eyes that caught him. They were kind eyes, intelligent eyes, eyes that looked at him and saw a person rather than a threat. The summit began with tension thick enough to cut. The human colonies were expanding too fast, some species argued. Humanity needed to be contained, restricted, perhaps even pushed back to their own solar system. Species after species stood and listed humanity's crimes, their wars, their environmental destruction of Earth, their tendency toward violence. Jake listened to it all without anger. He knew it was true. Humanity had done terrible things, but they had also done beautiful things, brave things, things worth defending. When it was his turn to speak, Jake stood and faced the council. He did not have a prepared speech, just spoke from his heart. Jake spoke for 20 minutes about humanity's journey. He did not make excuses for the wars or the mistakes. Instead, he talked about what humans learned from their failures. He spoke about the children on Titan Station who were alive because people chose to fight impossible odds. He talked about doctors who worked themselves to exhaustion, saving alien lives during the Kepler Passage battle. He described teachers on Earth who were already creating programs to help human children understand and respect the cultures of other species. When he finished, the chamber was quiet. Then Princess Lyra began to glow brighter, her skin shifting to warm gold. Jake would learn later that this meant approval and hope in Valkyrie expression. The council agreed to give humanity a probationary membership. It was not a full seat, but it was a beginning, and it came with conditions. Jake Morrison would serve as a liaison officer, working directly with council representatives on peacekeeping missions. He would prove that humanity could be trusted with greater responsibility. What nobody mentioned in the official documents was that he would be working most closely with Princess Lyra Vel Acheron herself. Their first mission together came 2 weeks later. A group of pirates had been raiding supply convoys in the Outer Veil, a region of space far from any government control. The pirates were hitting ships from multiple species, which meant the council had to respond. Jake met Lyra on the landing platform of her ship, the Eternal Dawn. It was a vessel unlike anything in a human fleet, all curves and flowing lines, powered by technology that bent space rather than pushing through it. Where human ships looked like weapons, the Eternal Dawn looked like a work of art. Lyra greeted him with a gesture he had learned was a sign of respect among her people, one hand over her heart and a slight bow. Jake returned it, though he felt clumsy doing so. "Captain Morrison?" she said. Her voice had a musical quality, like she was always on the edge of singing. "I look forward to working with you." "Just Jake is fine, Your Highness," he replied. She smiled, and her skin flickered with pink and gold. "Then you must call me Lyra. We are partners in this mission, not subjects and royalty." The pirate situation turned out to be more complicated than expected. The raiders were not criminals, but refugees from a world the Krell had destroyed. They were stealing supplies because they were desperate, because their children were starving, because nobody in the galaxy cared enough to help them. Jake wanted to bring them aid instead of weapons. Lyra agreed immediately, but the council had sent them to stop the raids, not to start a humanitarian mission. They were exceeding their authority. They did it anyway. Jake coordinated with the human supply network to redirect food and medical supplies. Lyra used her influence to find the refugees a new world where they could settle, a planet that had been abandoned centuries ago but was still habitable. Together, they negotiated with the refugee leaders, offering them a future instead of punishment. It worked. The raids stopped. Hundreds of families got a second chance at life. The council was not pleased with their methods, but they could not argue with the results. It was the first of many missions where Jake and Lyra found solutions that nobody else had considered. Over the next 4 months, they became an effective team. Jake brought human creativity and adaptability. Lyra brought deep knowledge of galactic politics and technology far beyond Earth's current level. More importantly, they began to understand each other. Lyra was fascinated by human culture. She asked Jake endless questions about Earth. Why did humans create music in so many different forms? What made them laugh? Why did they form such strong bonds with animals? She listened to his explanations with genuine interest, her skin colors shifting through the full spectrum as different emotions played across her features. Jake found himself equally curious about the Valkyrie. Lyra taught him about temporal meditation, a practice where her people could slow their perception of time and experience moments more deeply. She explained their philosophy that every being was a note in the great song of the universe, and that harmony came from learning to hear each other clearly. He tried temporal meditation once and completely failed, much to Lyra's amusement. But he kept trying because he could see how important it was to her. They shared meals when their biologies allowed. Lyra could eat some human foods, though she said most of it tasted too simple to her enhanced senses. Jake tried Velkari cuisine and found it overwhelming, like every flavor was turned up to maximum intensity. They laughed about it, finding joy in their differences rather than letting those differences divide them. One mission brought them to a disputed mining operation, where a human corporation was digging on a world that indigenous species considered sacred. The corporation had legal rights according to council law. The indigenous people had moral rights according to anyone with a conscience. Jake and Myra worked for 3 weeks to broker a compromise. The corporation would get their minerals from a different region of the planet. The sacred sites would be protected under council heritage law. The indigenous people would receive a percentage of the mining profits to develop their own technology. It was exhausting work, filled with setbacks and arguments. There were nights when Jake wanted to give up, when the different factions seemed too far apart to ever agree. But Lyra never lost faith. She would remind him that the best solutions took time, that rushing would only create more problems later. The night they finally reached an agreement, Jake and Lyra stood together on an observation deck, watching the planet below. The indigenous people were celebrating with lights and music that they could see even from orbit. "We did something good today," Jake said quietly. Lyra's skin was glowing soft blue and gold. Colors Jake had learned meant contentment and affection. "You have a gift for this work, Jake. You see people, not just problems." "I learned that from you," he admitted. She turned to look at him, and something in her expression made his heart beat faster. Her colors shifted to deeper blue with hints of violet. Lyra looked like she wanted to say something important, but the moment was interrupted by an urgent message from the council. Another crisis needed their attention, and the moment passed, but Jake could not stop thinking about that look in her eyes. Their next mission took them to investigate strange energy readings near an abandoned Stargate in the frontier regions. The Stargates were ancient technology, built by a civilization that had vanished millions of years ago. Most still worked, creating instant pathways across vast distances, but some had gone dark for reasons nobody understood. Jake and Lyra took a small scout ship to examine the gate. What they found was a Krell ambush. Someone had leaked their mission details, and the enemy was waiting. The fight was brutal and short. Their scout ship was damaged in the first exchange of fire. Life support was failing, and they were vastly outnumbered. Jake pushed the engines beyond safety limits, weaving through weapons fire with the kind of desperate skill that came from too many close calls. They barely escaped, crash landing on a small moon with a thin but breathable atmosphere. The ship was destroyed. Their emergency beacon was damaged. They were stranded with limited supplies and no way to call for help. Jake checked Lyra for injuries. She had a deep cut along her arm where debris had struck her during the crash. Her blood was silver and seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. He used their medical kit to clean and seal the wound, his hands steady despite his racing heart. "You saved my life," Lyra said softly. "If you had not pulled us out of that dive when you did, we would have been destroyed." "We saved each other," Jake replied. "You were the one who rerouted power to the shields at the last second." They set up a shelter using materials from the wrecked ship. The moon was cold and barren, with rocky terrain that stretched endlessly in all directions. Jake estimated it would take at least 3 days before anyone realized they were missing and started a search. That first night, they sat together near a small heating unit, sharing the emergency rations. The moon had no atmosphere to scatter light, so the stars above were sharper and brighter than Jake had ever seen them. "Tell me about your family," Lyra said. "You never speak of them." Jake was quiet for a moment. "My parents died when I was young. A shuttle accident. My sister Katie raised me. She is 7 years older than me. She is a teacher now on Earth working with kids who want to study alien cultures. She would be proud of what you are doing," Lyra said. "Maybe. She always wanted me to find something other than the military. She said I had too much heart to spend my whole life at war." Lyra's colors shifted to warm gold. She was right. "You do have a great heart, Jake Morrison." Over the next 2 days, they talked more than they ever had before. Without missions or reports or the constant pressure of their duties, they could simply be themselves. Lyra told Jake about growing up in the Valkyrie Imperial Palace, about the weight of expectations and duty. She described how lonely it was to be royalty, how every interaction was filtered through protocol and politics. Jake shared stories from his military career, but also from before. He told her about learning to fly with Katie, taking her old ground car out to empty fields and pretending it was a spaceship. He described the taste of his grandmother's apple pie, and how he had never found anything in the galaxy that tasted quite like home. On the second night, Lyra taught Jake one of her people's songs. It had no words, just melody, but she said it was sung for travelers far from home. Her voice was beautiful, clear, and pure in the thin air. Jake listened and felt something shift in his chest, some wall he had built around his heart beginning to crack. "Your people believe emotions are sacred," he said when she finished. "What does that mean exactly?" Lyra thought carefully before answering. "We believe that what you feel is the truest part of who you are. Your thoughts can be confused or mistaken, your words can be lies, but emotions, real emotions, they cannot be false. When a Valkyrie loves, it is with their entire being. When we grieve, we honor that grief as we would honor joy. To deny emotion is to deny life itself." "That must make things complicated," Jake said. "Very," Lyra agreed, and her colors flickered with something Jake could not quite read, "especially when you feel things you are not supposed to feel." Jake wanted to ask what she meant, but before he could, the heating unit sputtered and died. They were out of power cells. The temperature began to drop quickly. They huddled together for warmth, Lyra's luminescence providing the only light in the darkness. Jake could feel her trembling, her body not adapted for such cold. He wrapped his jacket around both of them and held her close. "Jake," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." "You can tell me anything," he said. But she pulled back slightly, her skin flashing with colors that moved too quickly for him to interpret. Fear, hope, longing, all mixed together. "Not yet. Not like this. When we are rescued, when we are safe, then I will find the courage." They were rescued the next morning by a council search team. Medical personnel rushed to treat them for exposure and dehydration. Lyra was taken back to the Valkyrie medical facilities. Jake was debriefed by council security about the ambush. The investigation revealed that someone within the council network had leaked their mission details to Krell sympathizers. There was a traitor, but they could not determine who. Jake was assigned additional security. Lyra was recalled to the Valkyrie homeworld for her own protection. Before she left, she came to see Jake one last time. They stood in a sterile medical bay surrounded by equipment and guards with no privacy and no time. "What you wanted to tell me," Jake said. "On the moon." Lyra's skin cycled through a dozen colors in rapid succession. "Soon," she promised. "But when I say it, I need to say it properly, in the way of my people." Jake passed all 3 trials, though he spent 2 weeks in medical recovery afterward. His body was exhausted, his mind pushed to limits he had not known existed. But he had proven himself worthy by Valkyrie standards, and even Emperor Darius could not deny what everyone had witnessed. The Emperor came to visit Jake in the medical facility. He stood beside the bed where Jake lay, connected to various monitors and healing devices. The old Valkyrie ruler looked tired, his luminescence dim with age and worry. "You should not have been able to survive those trials," Darius said quietly. "They were designed for my people, beings who have evolved over millennia to handle such tests. You are human. Young, fragile, short-lived. By all logic, you should have failed." Jake managed a weak smile. "Humans are pretty good at doing things we are not supposed to be able to do. So I am learning," Darius replied. He was silent for a long moment. "By our law, you have proven your worth. I must honor that, even though everything in me wishes I could refuse. But know this, Captain Morrison, the political storm has only begun. There are forces moving against you and my daughter that I cannot fully control." He was right. While Jake recovered, the Purity Council, a faction of extremist Valkyrie nobles, began organizing a coup. They claimed that Darius had been corrupted by alien influence, that allowing a human to court the princess was a sign that the Emperor had lost his authority. They gathered support from traditionalist factions, and from other species who feared what a human Valkyrie alliance might mean for the balance of power in the galaxy. The coup attempt came swiftly and violently. Purity Council forces seized control of 3 major Valkyrie worlds and blockaded the capital. They declared Darius unfit to rule and demanded that Lyra renounce Jake and marry a Valkyrie noble of their choosing. Jake was still recovering when the news reached him, but he pulled himself from the medical bed despite the doctor's protests. His body ached and his hands still shook from the trials, but none of that mattered. Lyra was in danger, and he would not lie in a hospital while she faced a civil war. He contacted Admiral Helen Grant, the commander of Earth's defensive fleet. "I need ships," he told her. "The Valkyrie Empire is tearing itself apart, and Lyra is at the center of it." Helen was a practical woman who had fought in the early conflicts with the Krell. She understood what was at stake. "This could drag humanity into a war we are not prepared for," she warned. "Or it could show the galaxy who we really are," Jake countered. "We do not abandon our allies. We do not abandon the people we care about. If we run now, we prove every species right who says humans cannot be trusted." Helen was quiet for a moment, then she smiled. "You always were too stubborn for your own good, Jake. I will send you what I can, but this is unofficial. If things go wrong, Earth will deny any involvement." "Understood," Jake said. But it was not just human ships that answered the call. The Thorax, remembering how Jake had stood with them at Kepler Passage, sent a battle group. The Luminari contributed their advanced sensor ships. The Depths Dwellers offered support vessels. Even some Valkyrie military units, loyal to Lyra rather than the Purity Council, joined the coalition. Word had spread across the galaxy about Jake's trials. Millions of beings had watched him endure impossible tests for love. Young people from dozens of species organized protests supporting Jake and Lyra. Social media networks blazed with debates about tradition versus progress, isolation versus connection. The coalition fleet gathered at the edge of Valkyrie space. Jake stood on the bridge of the human carrier Defiant, looking at the tactical display. They were outnumbered, but they had something the Purity Council forces did not. They had a reason to fight that went beyond politics or power. Lyra was commanding a Valkyrie cruiser called the Morning Star, leading the Loyalist forces. When her face appeared on the communication screen, Jake felt his breath catch. She was wearing battle armor that gleamed like liquid gold, her skin blazing with determination and fierce hope. "Ready when you are, Captain Morrison," she said, and there was steel in her musical voice. The battle above the Valkyrie homeworld lasted for 6 hours. It was chaos and coordination in equal measure, ships from a dozen different species working together with tactics they invented on the fly. Jake found himself doing what he did best, seeing patterns in the chaos and finding ways to turn disadvantages into opportunities. The Purity Council forces were well-equipped and well-trained, but they were rigid in their thinking. They could not adapt when the Coalition used unconventional tactics. Human ships would make reckless charges that looked suicidal but were actually calculated distractions. The Rax fighters would swarm in patterns that seemed random but created gaps in the enemy formations. Luminary vessels used their sensor capabilities to predict enemy movements before they happened, and through it all, Lyra commanded her forces with a brilliance that reminded everyone why she was heir to the Empire. She was not just a princess in a romantic story. She was a warrior, a leader, someone who had earned her position through skill and courage. The turning point came when Emperor Darius himself took command of the Imperial flagship and joined the battle against the coup forces. His appearance rallied the undecided Valkyrie military units, and the tide began to shift. But the Purity Council leadership had one final desperate move. They launched a suicide attack directly at the planet's capital, where billions of civilians lived. If they could not control the Empire, they would burn it down. Jake saw it happening and made a decision in the span of a heartbeat. He ordered the Defiant directly into the path of the enemy missiles, using his ship as a shield. The carrier's defensive systems shot down most of the warheads, but several got through.